In this presentation, we're going to work through the examples in the handout Visual Design and Print Advertising. And the main purpose of this activity is to take a look at some of the design tools that advertisers use to more clearly communicate their messages to potential consumers. So there'll be different strategies, and then we'll look at examples of how those strategies play out in exact ads. And what the top of the sheet basically says is that nothing in a multi-million-dollar ad campaign is accidental. Everything is done carefully and with precision to generate a specific response from the people that are going to be looking at the ad. One important tool that advertisers often use is to create a visual axis somewhere on the page. And often this is done, as we'll see first here, horizontally. Somehow, at some point in the image, it is divided into a top half and a bottom half, and each have certain customary roles in communicating the message. Very often what we see is on the top half there's some kind of emotional appeal, a pathos appeal, and then you read down the ad to the bottom where there's more of a logos, a rational appeal. Consider this example where on the top, this is an ad for Jeep promoting their adjustable seat height. And on the top we have this sort of adorable out-of-place giraffe peeking in the door of this Jeep. That's the pathos, the emotional appeal. But then we move down to the bottom and we have more of a logical, rational appeal to the consumer, where the Jeep company is actually explaining that they're promoting quadra-lift adjustable ride height, whatever that might be. But you see the shift from the top, pathos, transitioning down to logos, logical appeal, at the bottom. Here's a second example of that same setup, this time a McDonald's campaign called Make Billy Our Problem. Here the pathos is a little bit different. Obviously it's a negative appeal to emotions. We have this slimy, reprehensible gremlin child in the top half of the image. But then if we move down, we see the appeal to rational logic. Make Billy our problem, have your kid's birthday party at McDonald's. Get rid of this horrible cleanup and all the work that accompanies a birthday party at your home, and instead let McDonald's take care of it, and they'll deal with all the damage afterwards as well. But again, we have the appeal in emotion at the top and then transitioning down to logic at the bottom. Advertisers can also invert or subvert, to flip around our normal expectations in regard to a horizontal axis division. Here we have an ad for a fitness club. The campaign is called Water Fits You. And you can see here they're sort of reversed because the emotional appeal is actually at the bottom. This is what you could look like if you go to our location on a regular basis. Whereas on the top we have probably what this consumer currently looks like before she takes full advantage of the services offered by the fitness club. So we're still using a horizontal division very much in the waterline there, but the pathos and the logos are to a certain extent reversed from what we'd standardly expect their organization to be. Advertisers can also create an axis that doesn't run left to right, the horizontal axis we've already looked at, but instead runs up and down, what we might call a y-axis. Now when an ad is organized in that fashion, generally the left-hand side is devoted to the problem or current situation, and the right-hand side is devoted to the solution that only the product being advertised can really provide. So you see in this example for Axe Anarchy Body Spray, on the left-hand side we have the problem, this lonely, kind-hearted, studly blowtorch worker, and on the right-hand side we have the solution that Axe Body Spray can bring into his life, which is this fetching redhead with a bag full of explosive fireworks. So we have problem on the left and solution on the right. And we also see that reinforced in this ad because on the left hand we have like the barred windows of this confining job, and on the right hand we have the open door of the exciting time that they're going to have together if he drops his torch and heads out with her for the evening. The next ad is very similar, just to reinforce that idea. This time Llama Fashion, and their campaign was called Feel Like a Woman. And you see this very clear division down the center of the page, a vertical division of the image. On the left-hand side, we have the problem. This woman has a shell of a life that evidently spends 95% of her time sweeping, but through this magazine and its exposure to fashion, she can walk away as this new person, newly beautiful, newly exciting, newly empowered by this fashion magazine. Now, we saw earlier with the horizontal division that advertisers know that we expect the pathos on the top leading down to the logos at the bottom, and so they sometimes subvert that and switch it around. They do the same thing at times with the vertical axis. They know we expect the problem on the left and the solution on the right, and so to get our attention, they switch it up. Here's an advertisement for Top Cuts, a hair care place, and the slogan was, "When it's bad, it's all they see." And here you say it's reversed. The problem is on the right-hand side, which is this hairy, disgusting dude whose evidently bad haircut makes him look like a Wookiee to a prospective date at a bar. And there, the solution is on the left-hand side. Not only the girl, but also the slogan and name of the company that's being advertised. So at times, they subvert our expectations to get our attention in a new way. But the point is, they can't subvert that until they know the customary left-to-right reading, problem to solution, reading across the page as we would normal words. Now, what I'd ask you to do at this point in the presentation is take a break, press pause, and look at your ads and determine whether they're horizontally or vertically split. And actually take a pencil or pen and draw a line on each of the ads, separating them either from top to bottom or across. Almost every ad is going to use some function of division. So find those division lines in your ads and mark them so that later perhaps you can reflect on whether the author of your ad is using the conventions we've discussed or other tools to shape your impression of the product being promoted. Now let's look at a different common tool that advertisers use, and that is a separation between background and foreground. They kind of use the three-dimensional aspect of the ad, the fact that it can have depth, to bring certain things to your attention and hold other things at a distance. As an example, consider this ad for a mobile phone campaign trying to convince consumers not to text and drive. It says one letter is all it takes, don't text and drive. And you can see the kind of visual element here is that in the time it takes you to press one letter on your cell phone, you could cross a great distance and strike someone that you didn't see well looking out of your car. But the point is you have this huge background-foreground division. You have far in the background, they're using the depth of the image to show how far away the family could be, and still in just looking down to type one letter, you could strike them. So this ad doesn't work unless you imagine it having depth and a background and a foreground. Just to reinforce that, let's look at a second example. This is for a product called Celebration. It's a chocolate company. And in the image, which is sloganed, "When you want to celebrate," you see a background-foreground contrast. In the background, at a distance, we have this evidently horrific injury that's going to conclude the season of a championship gymnast. But in the foreground, up close to the camera, we have her competitors silently celebrating her demise by snacking on some chocolates. The ad doesn't work without this calculated use of depth, of what is kept at a distance, the injury, the screaming, the pain, and what is kept close to us, the celebration and joy that comes with and only through this magical chocolate product. Now again, what I'm going to encourage you to do here, please, is stop this video and look at your ads and select one of the three that has the largest contrast between background and foreground. Maybe they all have quite a bit of depth, maybe very little depth is in any of them, but select the one of the three that has the most depth and write background, foreground on the edge of the printout. And so one of your three ads should have that label before you continue. And that's the ad that you see as most using of your three, the difference between what is kept close to the viewer and what is held at some sort of distance. Another tool that advertisers can use is to purposely, intentionally not show you something or show you only part of something that you expect to see all of, and in that way draw our attention to what is missing and why. A strong example of that comes here from an ad funded by the Cancer Patients Aid Association, and the campaign was titled "Cigarettes Smoke People." And here we say what has clearly been omitted is most of the body of these cigarette smokers, and the intention is to help us realize what cigarettes in fact destroy, which is not just the end of the product held in our hands, but instead the health of the consumer that chooses to partake of this product. So it's what's not there that most captivates and stimulates the imagination of the person looking at the ad. Here's another example of that same technique. This time the campaign is funded by a group called Sanctuary, which works for animal protection in the nation of India. And the slogan is, "When the woods go, wildlife goes." And we notice a double omission. First of all, the fact that this rainforest is evidently being logged and cut down for consumer benefit, but at the same time we see the top half of the body of this wild animal has also been sliced off and omitted, and the point being that the deforestation is going to lead to great tragedy for the animal population of those regions. But it's the omission, it's the absence of what we expect to see that gets our attention and stimulates thought about the product. A last example of that approach, more for fun than anything else. This is part of a Lego campaign, and the slogan was simply "Imagine." And you may look at it for a second before you are able to identify what is happening here. But what is omitted is the great majority of the image being depicted. Here we have just a periscope peeking above the flat blue horizon of a Lego sheet, and then we'd be asked to imagine this gigantic Lego submarine that is lurking beneath the surface there. But most of what we're asked to imagine is not even on the page for us, but is instead summoned in our minds. And so again, we have omission. What is not shown to us is what generates thought and contemplation about the ad's message. Here I'm going to ask you to once again stop this recording, take a second, and look over the 3 ads you have printed out. And what we want to look for this time is which of the 3 most activate your sense of what is not there. Which of the 3 have you looking for something that is not depicted? And mark that one, please, with the word omission on the edge. Before we put background, foreground on one edge, now we're looking to write omission on the edge of one of the 3 that most draws our attention to in some way what is not represented visually on the page, as we might perhaps expect. So far we've taken a look at 4 strategies. The advertiser can divide the space horizontally and use pathos logos. They can divide it vertically and use problem, current situation versus solution revealed by the product. They can use a background foreground division, or they can omit something to call our attention to it. And now we have another technique. This is about space or crowding. Let's look for a second at this ad for the iPad mini. Now, this ad was always run on the back of a magazine. And so you can see there on the left-hand side is the front of that Time magazine, and on the back is the ad for the iPad mini. And the whole point was to demonstrate how small it was, how compact it was, which was a promotional idea at that moment. Now, what the advertisers are using here is the white space to generate interest in the product. We think, oh my goodness, there's all that white space on the edge of the magazine. Look how small, compact, and portable that product is. And of course, there's lots of different ways that an advertiser might use white space to call our attention to something about the product or something about the image. And this is an especially strong example of that. Now here we have a contrasting but related strategy, and that is to use crowding. The exact opposite basically of space or white space. This is for an ad promoting Claire's jewelry and accessories like you might find at the mall, and the campaign is titled, way in the upper corner in small print, "More is More." And we see this image that is just crowded with foodstuffs that this adolescent girl is going to devour single-handedly, and just everything is fancy and overdone, and the idea is to just show how crowded with luxury, I don't know about luxury, but crowded with products this Claire story is, and how it's beckoning to tween-age girls. But the point is, it's intentionally crowded, intentionally jam-packed with images, very unlike the Time ad that we saw a second ago. So either technique, either leaving space or crowding, can be effective to engage the reader and promote some aspect of the product being featured. As I have done before, now I'm going to ask you to stop this recording again and take a look at the ads that you have chosen for your project and write on 2 of them. First, look at them and decide which of the 3 has the most use of empty space. Now, I used the term white space before, but it would just be any empty space. It could be black or blue or yellow, but just space that is essentially void of content, of visual stuff. So write empty space on the edge of that ad. And then also of your three, select the one that is most crowded, is most tightly cramped with visual information. Now you may not have a very, very intensely crowded ad like the one for Claire's, but which of the three is the most crowded, and write crowding along the edge of that advertisement. Another technique we often see in advertising to gain attention for a product is exaggeration. Let's start with this ad for an underwater camera, and they're promoting how simple the one-handed operation of the camera is. And we see the wacky exaggeration of this scuba diver who's taking a selfie right alongside a great white shark. And so the comical exaggeration to draw attention to a real feature of the product, which is that it's very simple to operate with only one hand. A second example of that same strategy, here the company is Cemex Fast Drying Concrete, and you see the exaggeration once again is that the concrete dries so quickly that they're building that ledge out, and the cement truck is sitting on what just seconds ago was complete empty space in the face of that bridge. So wacky, admitted exaggeration, but to draw your attention to a genuine facet of the product, and that is in this case that it is extremely quick drying. As I have asked you before, I will once again ask you to stop the recording and take a second to survey the three ads that you have selected and decide which of the three most employs in some way exaggeration. Now, it may not be as wild and wacky as the two ads that we featured in this discussion, but I am here to guarantee that one of your three ads in some way exaggerates some facet of the product or its results. Along the edge of that ad, please write the word exaggeration. Now, a technique that advertisers also use that we're familiar with from literature and other forms of art are symbols. The advertiser takes something that has shared meaning in a culture and uses it to activate our interest, respect for, or admiration for the product. Let's look at some examples of that. Here we have an ad for Land Rover trucks. And what's immediately noticeable about this ad is that there is in fact no Land Rover truck or any other vehicle in the ad. Instead, we have simply a universal symbol for freedom and travel to wherever the heart desires. The bird, and specifically the eagle, this bold creature of American imagination. And he is looking up above him at, we would guess, the Jeep itself, the truck. And so not only can the truck travel to great places, this tagline is go beyond, but it can travel even beyond the heights explored by a bird as magnificent and free as the eagle itself. So we take that symbol that we all recognize and understand, the symbol of the eagle, and we activate its power in service of selling this vehicle to the consumer. Here we have a second example of that same strategy. This time, this is an ad for Sensodyne, which is a toothpaste for sensitive teeth, and their tagline is protects. And then we can see on the right-hand side, molars made of construction helmets that are white, and so we have this object that we already associate with strength and security and the ability to hold up to anything, and then we have it paired with this product, which is toothpaste for sensitive teeth. And so we employ a symbol that we all recognize and understand, and we use it to communicate something important about the product. And now, as we have done many times before, please pause this recording and survey your three ads and determine which of the three, one of the three does, maybe they all do, but at least one does, in some way employ something that we as a culture give symbolic power, that we already associate with certain traits or features. And the ad makers are trying to activate those existing understandings to help sell their product. Choose one of your three ads that most does that and write symbolism on the edge of the printout, please. Hey, here's a genuinely terrifying ad for another tool that advertisers often use, and that is simply lighting. This is an ad for Duracell batteries, and the campaign was called Some Toys Never Die. And we see an otherwise pleasant tea party between a little girl and her favorite doll, interrupted by this demonic doll from the past, and the lighting, the long cast shadow in front of the demon doll, and the eerie white light coming from the doorway greatly amplify the creepy message intended by the advertisement. And yet it also calls to our attention the feature of the product, which is that they last seemingly forever. Excellent batteries, terrifying doll of death. Now in this ad we see the same tool, lighting, but this time the contrast between light and dark, or shadow and illumination, are used to create a very different vibe than the terrifying ad we saw last. This time, in an ad for Powers Irish Whiskey, it's ours, we see the coast there of Ireland depicted as this beautiful, bright vista that we can have in our hands, not through thousands of dollars of airline travel and other expenses, but instead just through the simple taste of this authentic Irish whiskey, which will transport us magically to this beautiful land, perhaps from our past. But the point is, what the ad is using is lighting. It's activating our interest in the product through this very intentional use of dark and light. Dark being where we are now, our lame-o life in New Ulm or wherever, and light being this beautiful vista that we could touch if we would just drink a few glasses of the best Irish whiskey available. Oh my goodness, you can guess what we're going to do next. Now I'd like you to pause the recording, please. Look at your 3 ads. Which of them most employs some kind of contrasts between light and dark, or shadow and illumination? Which makes the most obvious or fascinating use of lighting as an effect to grab and control your attention? And please take a second and write the word lighting on the edge of that particular printout. All right, so we have taken a look at 8 tools, 8 of them so far. We have horizontal division, vertical division, background, foreground, omission, crowding, use of space, exaggeration, symbols, and lighting. And now we're to one that you're familiar with from photography, and that is use of focus and blur, where the seller makes a decision to juxtapose, to put side by side sharp and fuzzy, or at least less clear elements in the design to draw your attention to something about the product. The first ad's kind of unusual. This is a Brazilian Alzheimer's support group, and the campaign slogan is Alzheimer erases even what you never thought you would forget. And you can tell right away that the intention here is to demonstrate dramatically how complete the theft of memory can be for Alzheimer's patients by demonstrating that you might even forget the face of your spouse from your wedding image. That is how all-encompassing Alzheimer's can be, and it communicates that very intentionally using focus and blur, where the faces of the image, the one thing we think we would never find blurry in our memory, has been eradicated by the disease of Alzheimer's. Now here we have a little different, perhaps less dramatic, but nonetheless effective use of focus and blur. This is an ad for Sparrow's Pizza, and the campaign was Bring Your Sweetheart Closer. And we can see that the space in which this couple is spending their evening is just about invisible to us, as perhaps it is invisible to them, because they are so entranced with one another, and evidently they're shared, to me disgusting because there's too many toppings, pizza. But the point here is that they've intentionally used focus and blur to show that when you're enjoying a Sparrow pizza with someone that you care about, the rest of the world basically fuzzes out into nonsense. And they demonstrate that visually with that technique of a strong contrast between sharply focused elements, the man, the girlfriend, and the food, and background distractions, which all but disappear, promises Sparrow, when you have the right pizza. Were you thinking to yourself, I'd like to pause and take a break before we learn another technique, and instead have a chance to mark up the ads that I brought? I am there for you. Take a second and look at your 3 ads and determine which of the 3 has the greatest contrast between sharply focused elements and perhaps blurry or at least less defined elements. Choose one of the 3 ads and write on the edge of that ad focus/blur, so that later you give some thought to the possibility that that might be a tool that your designer is using to grab and activate your attention in the product. Sometimes the advertiser establishes, even within a single relatively small print ad, a pattern that they then intentionally break to get our attention in some way. This is a great example right here. This is called Band Sports. It's a 24/7 sports channel. And you can see we have this family portrait. We look across the image, we get the pattern. Little girl, mom, little boy, other daughter. They're all staring at the camera attentively. But the pattern is broken by the father who is watching the sports channel instead of paying attention to the family portrait, and he looks like a doofus. But here we have a very clear example of the seller using the building and disruption of a pattern to get our attention and to hit home something about the product, which is that it is so riveting it can distract you even during a really important moment like a family photo. Somewhat similar, we have once again the building of a pattern and then its disruption. This is an ad for National Geographic for Kids magazine, and the campaign is titled Make Room for Nature. And we have a fun illusion here. We have all these birds intended to echo tweets and sort of digital media and children's fascination with screens. But disrupting that pattern is a genuine, organic, natural bird shoving his shoulders forward to get space on that branch and still get the attention of children. National Geographic then builds and disrupts this pattern to hit home the idea that you can kind of peel your child's eyeballs away from their iPod or whatever other digital distractions they might have and teach them something about actual living nature through their magazine. All right, so now let's take a break and look at your ads. Look at your 3 ads and determine which of the 3 has an example, or the most dramatic example, if there's more than one, of a pattern being either maintained or broken. Some kind of visual repetition within the ad. And write on that ad, whether it's an outstanding one or just your best example from the 3, the word repetition on the edge. Now that's 11 different techniques we've looked at so far, and now we'll take a look at just a few more on the final sheet of our handout. Sometimes the most important element, or a very important element in the selling of a product, is the setting, the place in which, the specific location in which the ad takes place. Here we have an ad for UNICEF, which is a group that promotes children's rights across the globe, and the campaign is titled "A Child Who Learns is an Adult Who Teaches." And we see it is set in some kind of run-down, slummy area. And the message, based on the woman on the left, seems to be that if we don't provide our children with powerful, positive mentors, they are going to follow the lead of whoever is around them, in this case, that woman. UNICEF wants to promote the idea that they can, with your donation, help rescue young people from that kind of environment, exposure to that kind of mentor, who then creates another generation of adults making poor decisions and compelling young people to echo those poor decisions. So the setting is the prime element in the communication of the message they intend to share with their ad. Here, a more lighthearted example, this one for Federal Express, sort of a competitor to the post office, and they're promoting their package transport. And we see this kind of ingenious image in which a man leans out a window to deliver a package to a woman that is a few stories down in the building that they live in. But because of the setting, because of the physical space, where a map of North and South America are painted on that structure, it also has the double message of sharing the notion that FedEx can transport your boxes huge distances, but with evidently a personal, kind service. And so the setting is a key factor in communicating not only the efficiency of FedEx, but also sort of the kind, neighborly attitude that they promise to bring to that service. Okay, so let's pause for a second, look at your 3 ads, and determine which of the 3 has the most important setting. Of the 3, which takes place in a location that most contributes to what it's trying to communicate about the product to the seller. For this ad analysis, I have restricted you to images, print images, so things that are not from video or television. And yet, the advertisers can often create the suggestion of movement in a way that helps communicate something important about their product. Here we have a print ad for Play-Doh and their slogan, "Let imagination take over." And we see a very dynamic suggestion of movement. The girl's head is, as politely as possible, exploding with all these creative impulses that are generated only, the Play-Doh company promises, through exposure to their product. Here we have a little variation on that idea of movement. We have an ad for Scrabble, and the slogan is "Every word counts." And we have this man given letters UGM, which could convert to either mug or gum, and both are present in the image, but we can't help but imagine him lifting that stable mug and finding it stretchy and gooey as it extends in this mound of orange gum. And so the movement, even though it's a still image, is very much the essential element in activating our imagination and interest in the facets of the product that the ad is meant to convey. Another quick example, this one plays with the formatting of a magazine. This is an ad for Adidas, and their slogan was "Forever Spirit." Doesn't really matter here, but the idea of this ad is that when you turn the pages, the woman continues her workout, and you actually activate the movement intended and implied by the visual image of the ad. And so you sort of animate the character in the ad as you consider animating yourself by exercising and embracing this healthy lifestyle that is promoted by Adidas in this image. All right, so now, as we have done before, let's pause. Let's take a look at our 3 ads, and let's determine, of these 3, which of them most employ some notion of movement, the suggestion of or somehow evocation of the notion of movement, even in a still image. And please, of course, write the word movement on the edge of the copy that you select. All right, so another technique that advertisers can use, and we have 3 left, is the notion of comparison and contrast, where in some way the seller presents a pair of objects or images or scenarios and indicates the similarities and differences between the 2 items. Now, the one we're looking at here is a creative example taken from a company in the Netherlands that tries to promote consumer safety. And the campaign is called "Children See Things Differently." And we have 2 images. On the left-hand side, under the sink, observed by an adult, where we see all these different products and their potential dangers. But then on the right-hand side, we see those same elements, but this time through the eyes of a child. And in that point of view, they look like toys or something to be freely messed with without injury. And so this comparison contrast is a very effective way to communicate the risks that children do not recognize that the ad is trying to bring to the consumer's attention. Here's a second creative example of that same strategy. This is an ad for Pepsi, and we have the 2 straws being lowered down into the beverage, and on the Pepsi side, no problem, but right side by side, what is obviously a Coke can, though the title has been stripped from the item. The straw is screaming out and turning into these 2 hands, desperately trying to resist being submerged in the rancid Coca-Cola. But the point is, compare and contrast with the clear intention of conveying the idea that Pepsi is delicious and desirable, while even a brainless straw would not like to be extended into that can of Coke. Just for fun, actually, one more example. This one is a serious but creative. This is the Brazilian car maker Fiat, and their campaign was designed to promote the notion of the dangers of drinking and driving. And you have these 2 cans seen from above. Now you see it, now you don't. When the can is closed, when you've not partaken of alcoholic beverages, the pedestrian on the highway is visible to you and thus safe from being harmed by your vehicle. Compare contrast on the right. When you have opened that can and we can see the bottom, you have emptied that alcoholic beverage. Now that pedestrian is invisible to you and susceptible to injury through your use of a motor vehicle. Point: compare contrast sets up something important about the message being conveyed, and that is we lose our sense of our surroundings through the consumption of alcohol. All right, now let's go to your 3 ads and determine which of the 3 are setting up some kind of comparison contrast. Now, it's very important to remember with this one, you may not have a very obvious side-by-side compare contrast. Your ad may be challenging you to compare something in the ad with our normal image of that thing in everyday life or in other contexts. So if you have a side-by-side, fantastic, mark that one, compare contrast. But you might also have an image that challenges you to put it with your imagination side by side with something else and notice the differences between what's depicted in the ad and what you generally expect. Okay, 2 strategies left on our sheet, and the first one is the simple notion of the subject. Very often, of course, even though I saved this for near last, very often the sellers make very careful decisions about the models featured in their advertisements. How old they are, what class they seem to belong to, male or female, fat, skinny, some in between, race, how much education they appear to have, their job, and everything else. Every trait of that subject is a carefully calculated decision. And very often, those decisions are engineered to convey some type of message to the consumer. Now, sometimes, as in the ads here that we're going to look at, they're pretty obvious messages, but be aware that there are always messages being conveyed. It's just a matter of how out front they are about those ideas. So the first ad is for a product, Levy's Jewish Rye Bread. And the slogan was, "You don't have to be Jewish to love Levy's." And if we look at the ad, we are immediately struck by the subject. We have this sort of adorable, preppy-looking Asian boy who's about to dive into this sandwich with this Jewish rye bread on either end. And here the subject is the chief element of the ad, that they're trying to advocate the notion that their product isn't only for this very small subset of the population, but is for everyone, even perhaps the last person we'd expect to find snacking on and enjoying a sandwich made with Jewish rye bread. The second example I'd like to share with you regarding the notion of subject is from a Singapore crisis relief campaign, and their slogan was, "Liking isn't helping." And here you see an image in which the subject is of utmost importance. We have a little girl who it appears has suffered in some tragic way. She looks sad and forlorn, and she's looking off into the distance, clearly looking for some kind of source of hope or a suggestion of a brighter future. And all that it appears that other countries are offering to her and their residents is these upward thumbs, suggesting the notion of Facebook likes and our use of social media, and the way we sometimes believe that those likes are adding up to some kind of genuine social change, but very often they are empty gestures. And so liking, merely clicking on those buttons online, isn't helping. That real change and real reform is going to require sacrifice of people, not just a simple, relatively thoughtless split-second decision with media. But the point is, the subject is what draws our attention to the ad and engages our imagination with the message that's being conveyed. Okay, second to last time, take your 3 ads, look at them carefully, determine which of the 3 has a subject who is most important to the ideas or facets of the product that the ad is trying to communicate. And write on that single one, please, subject. The last strategy we're going to talk about in this presentation is the actual physical arrangement of the text on the page. Now here we're not so much talking about font, we'll deal with that later, but instead just the strategic arrangement of the text in some way. Let's look at an example that'll make it more clear. This is an ad for Mercedes-Benz SUV, and what they're promoting is the tagline, "Because every family is different." And we see this series of 6 overhead shots of the SUV, and in each shot, the seats within the vehicle are rearranged to demonstrate all the different formations that can be created. But also, when we look from above, we see the word family spelled out by the different formations of the seats. And so each family is unique and individualized, and Mercedes can match that individualization by having countless combinations and arrangements of the space within your luxury vehicle. And so this text arrangement is very creative and intentionally promotes the facet of the product that they're most trying to communicate to the buyer, and that is the wide array of flexibility of seating within that car. Here's another example of creative text arrangement. This is from Sanyo Underwater Cameras, and their campaign was called See What's Under the Sea. And here we notice that the top text visible from above the waterline says floating log. That's what it appears to be. But using the product, using the perception of those underwater cameras brought to you only by Sanyo, you see that that is in fact a sleeping croc, a sleeping crocodile. And so these underwater cameras can give you an accurate perception of your environment that you would completely lack without their product. And so the text arrangement very compellingly and memorably demonstrates the important trait of the advertised item. Okay, last time, take your 3 advertisements, put them out in front of you, and determine of the 3. Now, maybe you don't have a really dramatic ad with text arrangement like the ones I featured in my examples, but of the 3 you have, which makes the most creative use of the text? One of the requirements for the selection of your 3 ads was that they had to feature at least 6 words. Of your 3 ads, which one most interestingly employs the arrangement of the text on the page in a way that helps promote something important about the product or the message? That is it. Please bring your 3 ads with the words you've written on the edges of the appropriate ones to class next time, and we will continue our exploration of advertising and the techniques that advertisers use to activate your interest and desire in purchasing their product.